Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, AARP Wisconsin, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal Sentinel.
Kevin Booth of Fond du Lac is a Democratic candidate in the 52nd Assembly District. Kevin, welcome to WisconsinEye.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
You listed some top issues, infrastructure, of course, and then you have got an emphasis on the next chapter in treating opioid abuse and addiction. Can we talk about that? What's your ideas? You say on the website that it's devastated neighborhoods, but go ahead, talk about your thoughts on how we fight that.
Yeah, we've spent a good amount of time, and we've increased funding to treatment facilities and things of that nature. And I really think, to make progress on this issue, we need to continue to support treatment, but we also need to come around the front side and work on prevention in the first place as well. So I think it's got to be on both fronts. And
your ideas on the next steps in prevention?
I think there's been steps taken in terms of reducing the number of prescriptions being given out. I think we can work a little bit on supply as well. So one of the proposals I've put forward or considered going forward with is smaller prescription sizes for.
Yeah, you want a 7-day limit, don't you?
The newly prescribed and acute only. Yes. So so for folks that have been taking them for some time, particularly we look at older folks that have quality of life and they're on painkillers for some time. We're not trying to take that away from anybody. However, victims of a car crash, the newly prescribed or for the short term, I think we should take a look at some 7-day limits. And it's just about reevaluating. And if after 7 days it makes sense for an extension, by all means. I don't want to leave anybody in pain that that should be taking them or should have access to them, but I do think it's a serious enough product that it's worth a closer look and a more frequent review for the newly prescribed and folks with acute pain, not for long term. You
also think we should legalize recreational marijuana, right?
I believe that marijuana should be legalized for recreational and medicinal use. I do support that.
What about those law officers who, this is their term, say marijuana is a gateway drug to other more dangerous?
I mean, that's something that we've heard for several years. There's also a pretty compelling argument that the other way around, that folks or areas that have legalized marijuana, they actually see reduction in some of what we consider more hard drugs, because when you buy on the black market, you're exposing yourself to folks that are more dangerous or have other things to try and sell to you. So.
Do you see legalizing marijuana as a major source of revenue for state government to pay for some of these other programs that you identified?
I believe there is revenue to be generated. Obviously there's the tax revenue that we've seen in other states that have legalized. I think the greater benefit economically is actually in cost savings. So we do talk about revenue. There is revenue to be gained, but it's certainly not the amount of revenue that's going to just flat out balance the budget. I think the real economic impact is cost savings in law enforcement and the legal fees of nonviolent drug charges and possession charges.
Part of this debate is the issue of whether we can reduce our prison population. Mm-hmm. Do you think if we legalized cannabis, that would be one result, that there wouldn't be as many adults in Wisconsin prisons?
Yeah, I think the whole country has a real issue with mass incarceration, and Wisconsin's not an exception to that. We do need to take steps to reduce our prison population overall. I want to make sure that offenders are held accountable. There need to be consequences for the actions that people take. At the same time, there is a bit more of a systemic approach to the recidivism rate and folks that reoffend, and I think that there's progress to be made. And again, nonviolent drug charges is certainly a big area that we can take a look at, and legalization would certainly result in that.
There's going to be debate next session over whether we need a new state prison. You don't think we do?
There is debate over a new state prison. I would actually again, the goal being to reduce the prison population overall in the long term. 2 of our state prisons are over 100 years old. So for that reason, I do think I would support a new state prison, with the exception that it's a new kind of prison, right? So our facilities are old and outdated to the point where they're almost more like dungeons. So I do think we need to put forth an update. But if we're updating it physically and structurally, we need to update it socially as well. And if we are going to fund a new prison, it needs to be one that's socially updated as well, in terms of focusing on rehabilitation, keeping folks out and staying out once they've served their time, they've done their time, they've served their sentence, and we want to make sure that they don't reoffend, and we don't want them coming back. So a new facility, but also a new way of operating it, so that folks don't reoffend and they stay out of prison.
Your campaign website also talks about our infrastructure. Now, is this a reference to the impasse, the gridlock in the Capitol over how we pay for highways, bridges, and construction and maintenance? How would you break that impasse?
Sure. Yeah, we need to take a look at our roads. I think infrastructure overall, we tend to see funding for infrastructure in waves, right? So the infrastructure crumbles, roads, bridges, highways, and then people get fed up, and there's this huge influx of funding, and then, well, we've put all that money into it, things are fixed, and we let it go for another 20, 30 years, and it's just this wave after wave of funding and not funding infrastructure. So I think we're at a point now where we need to increase funding to get our roads back in good repair. But at the same time, long term, we need to look at spreading that out and having it be more consistent and keep our infrastructure up to date once it finally is. So when I talk about infrastructure, we talk about the roads, bridges, highways. We call that traditional infrastructure. But we're also taking a good look at digital infrastructure. I think in 2018, how and where we access the internet matters, and we need to get high-speed internet out to the rural areas. For me, in the information age, digital infrastructure is infrastructure.
Yeah, you are critical of the FCC for their rules on net neutrality. Mm-hmm. Is there space in there for a state government to operate? Is there, or is that a totally federal issue?
No, there is. At the federal level, they rolled it back, repealed net neutrality. But there's several states across the country that have put in their own state rules. I believe Oregon was the first to come out in January, which was the month immediately following the rollback at the federal level in December. Mm-hmm. So I think it's on us at the state level now to stand up for what's right in all issues. And net neutrality, again, is not an exception. We can put in the laws to protect the people and keep the internet free and open. We can do that here in Wisconsin.
Follow-up question on transportation funding. When tolling is mentioned in the Capitol, do you have a position?
Yeah, I don't support tolling. I think the upfront cost to put in the tolling infrastructure, to me, is too much. Right? It costs a great deal to get all those buildings the tollways created and set up. It's a long-term investment before we even break even on it. And at that point, I think, rather than doing the tolling, I think there's better ways to prioritize that budget.
The package of tax breaks, tax benefits offered Foxconn prompted Kimberly-Clark to seek similar tax breaks. The issue, though, is when should state government help private companies? Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a tough one because we want to create jobs. We want to support the economy. I'm all for that. I like the idea of Foxconn having a headquarters here and bringing the jobs in. At the same time, I think you have to ask yourself at what cost, right? So the Foxconn deal specifically, they're talking about a $10 billion project, $4.5 billion in subsidies and tax breaks. That's 45%, right? If you or I decide to open our business, nobody's going to give us 45% to do it. So I want to bring in companies, I want to grow industry, I want to create jobs, but we need to be really careful about how we go about doing that. And now, in reference to Kimberly-Clark, we've really opened ourselves up to a pretty slippery slope. Every single, large business, big business in the state is going to be looking for something similar. And from their perspective, why wouldn't they, right? We've already opened that up, we've already done it. Why are we going to support Foxconn but not Kimberly-Clark? Again, we need to be very careful about that. I don't think that's the route we want to go. We can't buy jobs, right? If we believe in the fair market, we believe in capitalism, then the free market applies to private industry as well. And we need to be careful about buying jobs and subsidizing these companies to stay.
You would have voted then against the Kimberly-Clark tax benefits on, that was a vote the Assembly took on February 22nd.
I would have, yes.
Okay. The current budget included more than $600 million more in state aid to our K-12 schools. Local educators, some of them, teachers, principals, say thank you very much, but we need another similar big increase in the next budget. Do we?
We do, yeah. I mean, I'm glad we put in that extra funding, but we're not even anywhere near what we've taken away, right? So, you take away 10, you give 6, you're not really getting ahead. You're not really making that progress that you want to claim. So I think we're a long way away from having our public education fully funded, and there's a lot more work to do, and we have to push for that, because what better investment is there than our children, our next generation? They need to have the resources to be successful. So
The voucher, the choice program has expanded Milwaukee to Racine, now statewide.
Yeah.
Do you have a position on it?
I do. I do believe that when the voucher program was originally introduced in the 80s, I think it had good intentions. I really do. At the same time, in the 30 years since then, I think it's gotten off track from what it was originally intended to do, and it's really not serving that function anymore. So what I see it doing now is splitting. We're splitting the budget. We're splitting the dollars. We're taking an already not fully funded public education, and we're diverting dollars over to private education. I want to be very clear that I have no problems with the existence of private schools. At the same time, if it's a private school, they're not held accountable. Their books are not open to the public, and so for that reason, I don't think tax dollars should go to fund them. So private school exists. You want to send your children there. That's all good and well. I think that's great. It's good to have options. But if they're not held accountable for where the money goes, then it shouldn't be public tax dollars going towards it.
UW system budget, we've frozen resident undergraduate tuition for 6 years. The governor wants a freeze in the 7th and 8th year.
Yep.
You support the freeze or no?
I do. I think the freeze is doing the right thing. I think that our children, I look back to when I was going to school, and it's almost predatory what they're doing with student loans and tuition. So I think that is I really think it's a pending crisis to come, and it's going to come to a head sooner rather than later. So we need to take a closer look at student loan debt as an issue. I think we need to be able to refinance our student loan debt. That's a major staple of the campaign. So,
Local governments have lived with levy limits for 14 years to control property taxes.
Yep.
Some local leaders say, hey, this hurts our ability to provide local services. Keep levy limits, loosen them, dial them back, or get rid of them?
in the long term, I think getting rid of them is the right move. I think that needs to be gradual. So my answer would be to loosen them initially, and then potentially loosen them all the way to non-existent. I believe in local control. You know, I think the state government is there to take care of matters that affect the whole state, and who better knows how to govern their local communities than the local government. I believe strongly that the local municipalities should have more control, and I've heard from a lot of county board leaders, even city council members, that they feel more and more helpless, that they aren't able to make the decisions that impact their communities. So I believe in local control.
Let's talk about health care. How would you preserve and maybe expand health care in rural Wisconsin? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think healthcare, for me, healthcare is all about options and accessibility. That's really what it comes down to. We need to have options for every member of the state. I think, like I said, as money gets tight, as budgets get cut, the services get consolidated to the major metro areas. You know, Milwaukee, Green Bay, Madison. That's where everything kind of gravitates towards. And it's not right that someone living, an hour or two away from Madison should have to come to Madison to get basic services and basic needs. So we need to expand those options in all communities, rural or underserved urban. Yeah.
Have you heard from hospitals and other medical providers that Wisconsin's Medicaid reimbursement rates are too low? Do you think there's a tipping point in terms of being able to continue to provide quality health care through our Medicaid program?
I have been hearing that. Yeah, that seems to come up fairly fairly often. And again, I think it comes back to the Medicaid expansion and accepting those dollars. So we need to be able to have the dollars to fund those programs, and we should have taken the Medicaid expansion.
The state began a pilot program with Delta Dental that offers low-income dental care in some regional clinics. Are you familiar with that program? Should it be a priority in the next Medicaid budget?
I am somewhat familiar with that program, and I do believe that dental services are health services. Sometimes folks want to say, well, Medicaid or Badger Care should only apply to life-saving services, and I disagree with that. I think again, in a developed country like we're living in, vision, dental, those non-life preserving services are just as much a part of healthcare as any. I wear contacts. I've got terrible vision myself, and folks deserve to have access to dental coverage, to vision coverage. I think that matters.
As you campaign, are you hearing from caregivers? AARP estimates that 578,000 Wisconsin residents are caregivers for family members or neighbors. Would you support laws or rules that require hospitals to recognize and work with family caregivers when a loved one is hospitalized, or have you not heard about that issue?
No, we've talked about that also. There are more and more family members providing care as a result of healthcare becoming increasingly unaffordable. So healthcare is too expensive, so now we have more folks giving care from home, and if we can acknowledge the services that they're providing and the work that they're doing, we should be doing so.
Do we need to raise Wisconsin's minimum wage? If so, how much?
Yeah, I think the minimum wage should be a living wage, and I haven't quite decided on what the dollar amount is. I've heard everything from $10. I've heard as high as $21. I don't know exactly what the dollar figure I'm interested in is. At the same time, it's pretty clear to me that it has not gone up in some time, and it should. And this is similar to the infrastructure funding that we talked about earlier. It comes in steps, right? It's a big jump, and then maybe it's too high, and then it levels off, and then it's too low. I think we should look at raising the minimum wage on an annual basis based on cost of living. To me, that just makes sense. We figure out what the living wage is now, increase it to that, and then it should move incrementally as the cost of living rises. To me, that makes sense, and it's the least shocking or impactful, right? We have small business, and all of a sudden you raise the minimum wage $10. Yeah, the small businesses are the ones that are not going to be able to afford that or are going to make cuts, while big business is going to be just fine and take the profits to the top. So I don't think you can make really large spikes and jumps in the wage. I think it should go up incrementally with cost of living.
Differences between you and the incumbent you're challenging on November 6th?
Yeah, we're, to be honest, my opponent and I are almost polar opposites on most things. At the same time, I think it's a pretty easy decision for the people of Fond du Lac to make. He's been in office for 8 years. Are you happy with the way that's been? Are you satisfied with your representative being a rubber stamp for party leaders in Madison? Or do you want to try something new? Do you want a bold, modern, progressive approach based on what the people of Fond du Lac need? And that's what we're running on. So we're very different, but I think it's an easy choice to make.
Kevin Booth of Fond du Lac is a Democratic candidate in the 52nd Assembly District. The election's November 6th. Kevin, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Campaign 2018 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, Marshfield Clinic Health System, AARP Wisconsin, and Campaign 2018 partner Milwaukee Journal Sentinel.